Good morning. Good morning. This is Binyam on the Checkin In podcast. Welcome. Today is the 21st of September, 2021. As I was writing down that date for today's podcast, I was reflecting on, I don't know if any of you watch those numbers, like when it's 11, 11, 11. I kind of watch for those sometimes and I kind of like catching those cues. So today is the 21st day of the 21st year of this century. 21st day of the month, I should say. But aside from reflecting on the date and the significance, I'm happy to see you guys here this morning on the Checkin In podcast. This is episode number 57. And I am looking out on a bright, cloudless day again, which is fantastic. I like these kind of forecasts. As you can see behind me, it's looking pretty spectacular. Today is Tuesday, of course. We're going into the week. This is the podcast that I love making space and time for. First and foremost, because I feel it benefits me. It benefits me in some significant ways. 3 ways to be specific. Number 1, awareness. Awareness of me, who I am, how I'm evolving as a person, who I want to be. Secondly, is the kindness component. The kindness component in reference to myself. Not to others first, but to myself first. And then thirdly, the maximization of happiness. I love experiencing happiness, but the kind of happiness that is more foundational, substantial, the kind of happiness that isn't flitting and gone, after a few moments of enjoying it, but the kind that I can build on foundationally, especially as I learn to process all the other emotions along the way. So these are the 3 things I like to reflect on as I consider self-reflection questions. And I share this process with you guys so that you can see a model of how one does it. How I do it, for example, and why it's meaningful for me to go ahead and do it this way. So this is why I enjoy this moment in the morning, this half hour spent with you guys. And I'm so delighted to have you join in on this 57th episode of the Checkin In podcast. So as we get into today's topic, let me first of all read what question we're answering. Today's question we're answering is, which things felt important to you 10 years ago, but no longer matter to you now? Good morning, Tate for real. How are you, my friend? Glad to see you. Which things felt important to you 10 years ago, but no longer matter to you now? This is one of those self-reflection questions about our past. And as we reflect on our past, I find it's usually, for me, in reference of seeing progress and gratitude. Progress, and here's where I once used to be in the way I was thinking, and here's where I'm currently at in reference to how I'm continuing to evolve and move forward in my own trajectory. So that's what's on my radar as I look at this question. Which things felt important to you 10 years ago, but no longer matter to you now? On first impression, as I look at this question here, it makes me reflect on change. Friends 10 years ago, says Tate for real. Friends 10 years ago, my life was based off of them, but now I see I don't need them. They're nice, but not a necessity. Oh, I like that. Yeah. So I see even the growth and change there. And I feel very much in the same way as well, too, Tate for real. Again, for those of you coming in on the live stream, the question we're asking is, which things felt important to you 10 years ago, but no longer matter to you now? So thanks for sharing that, Tate for real. I also resonate and have a similar answer, I think. I'll see if I can flesh mine out a little bit more as well. But I'm thinking as I read this question here that change is almost inevitable. Once upon a time, I used to think that I had things so locked in, by way of convictions and priorities and pathways that I was going to go in the future. This is exactly the way it was going to go. And as I look back on my 4+ decades of existence, wow, there's a lot of change. And one of those things I've just come to expect and to brace for is that I'm changing over time. I'm changing over time in some significant ways, changing in a way that there are some things that were really important to me at one point, and now they're not as important anymore. So it makes me super cautious in the way that I am placing my values today. So for me today, as I reflect on this question, back then I was a lot more confident and rock sure about what my world looked like and also how life in general was. I didn't have much by way of allowance or much by way of flexibility in relation to um, how other options can come along the way and seem more compelling at some point in time. But now, as I reflect on my existence, again, over the last few decades, I'm just seeing how many things I locked into saying, this is super important. But then I moved on to something different. I said, oh, this is important. And over time, you just kind of see this cycle going through where I would say we collectively, because I think most people are in the same boat, we collectively are changing beings. It's one of those things that I know I don't like in life. I don't like change. I don't like when things are fluctuating and changing along the way. That's not my jam. I really struggle with change. And yet I can't get away from the fact that we do change over time. So that's an important reflection as we consider this question: which things felt important to you 10 years ago, but no longer matter now? So that is one of those considerations that I am reflecting on. And then, so I'm being asked a question here. So to the viewer who's coming in saying, "Hey, are there other people, or are you just talking to yourself?" For the most part, sometimes I'm talking to myself. There's like no one on here. Sometimes, other times there are people who are here, and so I am not daunted or discouraged when there isn't a lot of people who are on here. Because for me, one of my values is not fame and influence that way. I'm really interested in providing maximum value in what I'm doing here. And so I love spending this time, even if no one's showing up, because there's also recording going on. I record these podcasts. And for some of my viewers, they just can't make it this time frame. So they'll probably tune in later and listen to the recording. For others, however, they may discover this content later. And so I want to continue to put out as much value as I can, because that's one of my values, is to enrich other people's lives. And so why I commit myself as I do to doing this, if there's no one who shows up or if there's a million people showing up. For me, I'm as vested and as committed in the why of why I'm doing this, not that I'm not going to do this anymore because no one showed up. This is just one of the ways that I want to put goodness out there in the world, encouragement, inspiration. And there may be a time when it becomes far more different. I look forward to that time, but even then, I'm still going to continue putting out the value that I feel I'm putting out currently. So it's not that I'm going to try any harder when there's a million people versus no people on here. This is what I do by way of saying, here's where my importance, the values and important things that I've invest in are reflected in. So this is just one of those ways. So I'm not discouraged at all that there's only two people, one person, no people on the various live streams that I'm doing here. I continue to show up and to be consistent in what I'm doing. And so that's really important for me. But I appreciate the question. Thank you for asking it. So back to my point though, as I think on this question of what were some no, what things felt important back then, 10 years ago, that aren't as important now? For me, as I reflect on that question, I'm first of all acknowledging that there is change, significant change in all of us, I think, from the moment we're born, we're growing. I'm even watching teenagers that I know today and seeing the confusing and tumultuous experiences that they're having as they're trying to figure out how life goes. And I remember what that was like once upon a time when I was there. I'm reflecting even through my 20s, 30s, 40s here of things that I value, things that I put money in, things that I gave my time to, things that I sacrificed time for, that now I'm like, yeah, that's not a really big deal for me anymore. So what are some of those things is what we're reflecting on that no longer matter. And then I want to go a little further than that too, but I also want to help you understand and also process for myself why those things don't matter anymore. What came along the way that made those things sort of grow pale in their importance to me, and why they don't carry as much weight as they once did. And why is that? So that's also part of that reflection that I wanted to touch on, because as I reflect on that, the awareness piece grows more in understanding, hey, this is what I once was tickled by. This is what I once was enthusiastic about, but here's what shifted in my trajectory that made me think of investing in a different way or in a different area. I like the 10-year range too because it's a good snapshot. It's a good snapshot in one's life. Now, if you're younger than 10 years, obviously this is going to be a lot more challenging. But for those of us who are older, I think 10 years is a really good number because it gives that frame of reference of longevity. Like it's a good span of your time there, and it gives you a bird's eye view on a good chunk of your life. So I'm thinking 10 years is a good way to say, here's a recent me in the last decade, but that chunk of time, it's still hefty enough that we're like, we can actually see some progress. When you're, when statisticians are looking at their information, their numbers and figures, one of the things I think they appreciate is that time reference to be able to say, what can we get from this piece of information? Marketers are doing the same thing. Those who are in business are trying to see what is the evolving nature of things over time. Not only looking backwards, but also looking forwards and saying, where do we want to be in that bird's eye view span of time? This one here just happens to be in the past, which things felt important 10 years ago, but no longer matter now. And I also like that this talks about things that are our passion, things that we feel really strongly about, things that we are very vested in, saying, once upon a time, this is where my desire was expressed. Here is where my attention was focused. Here is where my passions were collated, if you will. And here's where I did find tremendous happiness or satisfaction in the way that I invested my time. And then what's different now? How has that changed over time? That's another really important consideration. And so, last night I was on another podcast with my friends, the Friendology podcast, which you may or may not know. Friendology is me and a group of my guy friends. We get together, talk about some fantastic themes and topics. And so I finished posting that on the Spotify this morning, and I'll post a video of that later on this morning. But we were talking about what kind of things could we talk about all day. And at first my friends were like, hey, why are we talking about this? Like, what does this have to do with friendology and being friends? And I suggested this has everything to do with what we're doing, because for me, one of the ways I grow deeper in my friendship and connection with people is hearing things that are super important to them, hearing about things that they're passionate about. And as we went through the podcast last night talking about those things, we made some amazing discoveries about each other. We're like, I never knew that this is one of your interests. I never had an idea that this was on your radar by way of frame of reference, or that this is something that you were really super passionate about, or those kind of things. It was like really, really revealing. And at the end of it, they were just sharing how we felt a sense of deepening in our friendship. We felt a sense that we knew each other a lot better. And it was a beautiful thing. And so even as we reflect on things that we were passionate about and that were important to us 10 years ago, but aren't anymore, that still gives us an insight into how we're changing as individuals. And as we hear that in each other's stories, we have a better awareness of each other. It's a way of sharing ourselves, saying, here's me now, here's me when I once was 10 years ago, and how that change has happened over time. Here's why I find this important. Here's why I love investing in this area. Here's why I want to give my time over here, because this means something to me, whereas this didn't anymore, And so that's a beautiful thing to watch. And one of those things that feeds a rich dialogue or conversation piece with people. So there's a little bit of tidbit of how I also facilitate conversations on the go and make those worthwhile. So let me dive into my response of which things felt important to me 10 years ago, but no longer matter to me now. So let me just paint a picture for you of where I was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I wasn't separated from my ex. We were still married, happily so. She was a really amazing individual. And we had kids, of course. Yeah, we had 10 years ago. My oldest would have just been born. So that was just when my first one was being born. I was in the midst of finishing my graduate studies. And at that time, what was super important to me, kind of like Tate for Real was sharing on his answer, on his share, was uh, what people thought about me. I was finishing my grad studies. I was about to go into my career as a pastor. I was a pastor for quite a few years. And the world was looking really good. The world was really looking very promising. At this time, there was a church that had, if you will, headhunted me and said, "Hey, we want you to come and be our leader in our church and help us move forward." So that's what I was preparing for. I'd agreed to that post. And as I was preparing for that, I was getting ready for graduation. So of course, there's a lot of like, "Yay, hurrah!" A lot of people in my life who were really important, clapping for me and saying, "Yeah, go for it." So that was really cool. But amidst all that, I think there was a certain sense of apprehension that I had of, can I hold this line together? Hold this line, because here's me about to go into my career, something I've prepared for the past many years. And as I'm preparing for this career, and for those of you coming in, the question we're answering today is, which things felt important to you 10 years ago, but no longer matter to you now? So I'm just about to get into mine. 10 years ago, I was a brand new dad. Actually, I think I had just my one 10 years ago. My first had just been born, which means that I wasn't graduating. I was just about to graduate. So I was still in the latter part of my grad study degrees. And I was trying to keep everything afloat. I was working about 3 jobs while also being a student full time. Holy crap, that is like intense. So my 3 jobs were, I was a school bus driver. I delivered papers, like newspapers, and I was working at a welding shop. So my schedule would go something like this. Picture this. I'd wake up in the morning, actually at nighttime around midnight. From midnight to about 6 o'clock, I would be delivering papers because I had hundreds of papers that I needed to deliver. I'd taken on huge paper routes, and so that's how I sort of tried to provide for my young family. So I was delivering papers from midnight to about 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock, that was my deadline for the papers being delivered. Then I'd hustle over to the bus garage and pick up my bus. Actually, I remember now, I've eventually been given permission to park my bus at the school because they had lots of space there. So I'd rush back to my bus, warm it up, start it up, and get it warming so that I could go on my morning run. And after I did that, after I started up my bus, and then I went on my school bus run, drive out into the countryside where there's beautiful homes that I was driving in amongst, and pick up the kids for school. I'd drop them off at school, rush back to my studies at school and attend my classes, do my homework, and then I'd rush back to my bus after classes were over and hurry back over to the school, pick up the kids after school, drop them off, and then park my bus, and then drive out to my other job. And then I'd work on my other job from like 4 to like 6-ish, 8-ish or so. And then I'd come back home, spend just a few moments with the family, and then I'd crash. And that was my very rigorous schedule. It was like really tight and jam-packed. I was busy. In fact, in most of my university years and my grad studies, I never really had time for social engagements. I never really enjoyed that element where I, in the midst of my studies, got to go and spend time with my friends. And so that was really difficult for me. I wanted to spend time with my friends while I was studying, but I knew I was responsible for a few different work commitments that I had to attend to. And so I get to know my friends as best as I could in the middle of class or study periods in the daytime, but I wasn't able to go and attend parties or join them for social events. Excuse me. And so along those lines, it was a challenging experience to be in studies and yet not be able to really enjoy these things that is part of that process of enjoying your studies at school. But what was important to me at that time was just trying to hold the schedule well together and survive. Literally, I was just really trying to survive because there was a lot going on. But I felt this pressure to get the studies done so I can get onto my career. My career was very important to me. I was really looking forward to being I was really looking forward to being a pastor and leading people and talking about things that I valued highly then. And back then, my faith was super important to me as a Christian. I was really I was enthusiastic about it. I love the study component. Like I was in my happy place. Like this is what I wanted to study. But as I went through it, the studies were grueling and they were heavy. Like the expectations were super high as far as what I had to accomplish and how I had to progress through them. It was really, really challenging, absolutely challenging. I look back now at what I was able to accomplish, and I'm still in wonder at how I made it work without falling apart. But I made it work. I just committed myself to it, head down, like just I barreled my way through. It was really, really a challenging season. But as I applied myself to it, I did it because it was super important to me then. My faith was important to me. My upcoming career was super important. My family was really important to me. I was trying to fit this mold that I valued and that I wanted to align with. There were some gaping areas that, if you know my story, were kind of incongruous to where I was going, but I wanted so hard to try and experience what this lifestyle was like, to be able to give myself wholly to what I was passionate about, and that was in my faith community, and my career options, even as I was facilitating, still being a dad. And the reason I was driven by these things being important to me was even more so the most important part for me was how to, I guess, get people's acceptance, get people's acknowledgement saying, "Hey, Biniam, good job. You're doing great." That meant a lot to me. And so that's why I applied myself as hard as I did in the many job contexts that I did, in my career that I was pursuing, in trying to even do a good job as a husband and as a dad. I wanted to be like a leader, if you will. Thanks for the encouragement when my dear friend came in. He's coming in saying, "Hey, keep these talks up." I appreciate it. Thank you. Yes, so that was what was really important for me, was to try and align with people's expectations on me of what success looked like and how I could be in that zone where I was accepted. Now, there's nothing bad about being accepted. There's nothing bad about trying to fit in community in a way that you're getting along with those around you. But I would suggest that there's something grossly wrong when we're committed to these experiences of community in the absence, listen carefully, in the absence of knowing ourselves first and what really matters to us. That's a really important consideration. When we are not in that zone, if you will, when we're not in that zone of being in our own power and knowing why we're doing what we're doing, and that being for our own primary benefit first and foremost before it is for others, I think something's out of whack, and that's the zone that I was living in. So at the heart of it, for the longest time, I was driven by this desire to please others, and to please others by doing what I thought it was that others would expect from me. And so that was sort of like what drove me for a very long time, is this anticipation of saying, how can I be accepted by others by doing what they expect me to do? And in my faith community that I grew up in, I really wanted to be successful. I wanted people to look at me and say, "He's got to put together." And isn't that what a lot of us are doing for the most part as we go through life? Before we walk out the door, we make sure that we look presentable. At home, we might look like slobs, right? We might not comb our hair, we might not have a shower or something like that. But before we go outside, we're compelled to look presentable so we don't look like a failure, right? And so along those lines, like, even look at me today. I wore a bow tie. I wore a shirt. Yesterday, I had a hoodie on. I enjoy this kind of dress style just because this serves me. So I go out of my way to do this. I cut my hair today, if you did not notice. I do these things because, first and foremost, I want to look presentable for myself as opposed to others. But 10 years ago, I would have been doing this to say, I know the people in my life think that I look better if I have curly hair that's long, then I'll grow it out to please them. I know they will want me to be taking this perspective, so I'm going to take on this perspective because that's what their expectation is. Or they might have this desire that they want to see expressed, and here's me stepping up to plate to try and fulfill that desire. A huge part for me once upon a time was of what was important was driven primarily because I was reading people really well to say, here's what they want to see from me. So I'm going to give that to them so that I can be loved and accepted by them. And I was love hungry. I was love hungry. I was acceptance hungry. Um, I was I was really driven by how can I find my worth because others tell me I'm worthwhile. And I'm just sitting with that for a moment here and thinking how things have changed since then. But wow, what a painful thing that we find our worth because someone else says you're worthwhile. That is like almost slavery. Wouldn't you agree, my friends? Wouldn't you agree that this is almost like slavery when we apply ourselves saying, hey, I am at your mercy to give me my worth. I'm basically on standby waiting for you to say that I'm worthwhile. That's where I was 10 years ago. This is why I'm so grateful as I reflect on my past to see the change that's happened over time, the change in evolution of Binyam, and what I've once found really important, but now I'm like, actually, no, that's not me anymore. I'm in a different season. I'm in a different zone. And I love that. I love that reflection that I'm not who I once was because I feel freer today. I feel like I'm more in my power. I'm experiencing more liberty and freedom from what once really mattered. Because where I once was, that was super. It was super binding. It was super like it just pushed me down in a way where I wanted air, but I couldn't get air. You know what I'm saying? And I didn't realize that then. I was kind of in that zone of not seeing or perceiving that this is exactly what I needed, what I'm currently experiencing now. So that's what really mattered to me 10 years ago, but it doesn't matter to me anymore. I wanted people's acknowledgement, and I pursued that in my faith community, especially by becoming sold out to the message that we evangelized about or proselytized or try to get converts on. I was enthusiastic about the history, the studies, and the ideologies, the ideas that we espouse. I was really enthusiastic about all that. I was also enthusiastic about being the kind of dad and husband that I felt would bring me honor, you know? And I mean, while those things are good, I did it for the wrong reasons. I did it so I could please others and get my acknowledgement from them. Today, I don't really care about acknowledgement from others. Someone was coming on here earlier and saying, hey, are you talking to yourself? Like there's like no one here. And I said, even if there's no one here, I'm okay. That doesn't matter for me. My ego is not hurt at all. I'm doing this first and foremost for myself to grow, to help me grow in my awareness of me, how to be kind to myself, how to experience far more happiness. And I share this experience with those who are interested, whether it's a couple like is on here right now, or whether it's a couple of million. It doesn't matter. I'm still going to be on point to the way I am. This is where I find tremendous value. So that isn't even important for me anymore. The seeking for approval from others. This individual is probably saying, hey, this is indicative. This shows that you aren't worthwhile or that people don't find you worth their time. And I'm like, that's okay. People don't find me worth their time. They're going to move and find something else. But for those who do find this worthwhile their time, and I appreciate you guys for being here and being a part of this, I want to bring maximum value. Just because there's a couple on here, it doesn't mean I'm going to give you like the watered down version of my content. No, I want to give you still the richness of what I'm experiencing and how I'm going through life. And that's why what I'm doing matters. So yes, I'm so thrilled that I'm not still in that zone that I once was, where other people's say really mattered and I was driven by that. I'm so thrilled that now I'm in a far different season where I'm living my own life according to my own terms. I'm not even in my career that I've spent so much preparation for. I've moved on from there. And it's not that I look back on that time as a waste of time. Not at all. It was rich time. It was juicy. It was beautiful. There's amazing things that happened there. But I'm in a different zone now. I'm in a different zone now that matters a lot to me. And where I'm at right now, and how I apply myself is so meaningful to me. I am so thankful for the freedom that I have to speak my mind, to be able to share my perspectives, to be able to move forward in life in a way that says, this is what makes me happy. This is what makes me thrilled about how I'm investing myself. And you know what? I'm even thinking into the future now when I'm looking at this moment a decade from now and wondering, are the things that I value right now still going to be as important to me? That's the way I'm trying to make my decisions in saying, where do I want to find the substantial riches of my existence? And how can I stay in that long term? So that's an exciting prospect, as I think, what am I going to think in the future was pointless that I'm currently doing? Another way that I also think about that reflection is with my kids. My kids are watching me parent them and influence them, but at some point in the future, they're going to look back with a critical eye saying, Dad did really well here, but Dad kind of dropped the ball here. What are those things that I'm currently dropping the ball on that I may not have access or awareness to? I'm trying to see as best as I can, but I'm still open to the prospect that I'll be looking back on these moments in the future and saying, it's interesting how I thought that was important, but I don't anymore. And that for me is part of that kindness piece. Being kind with myself and saying, I'm a process in change. You're a process in change. Can we extend to ourselves this patience that says, it's all right for us to change. It's all right for us to become someone different over time. My encouragement, and if you'll consider joining me, is can we do so together in a way that makes us feel like this is worth our while? Guys, thanks for joining me on this 57th episode of the Checkin In podcast. I will see you all tomorrow. Love you guys.